Right, you are all very welcome. I first should begin by saying I feel a little bit of an interloper here on floor 2. My natural habitat, although I'm not a member of the history department, is 2 floors above. So I'm very grateful to Joelle, Chair of English, for allowing me to open this evening, which I will do in a moment. And also Johannes, who I don't think is here tonight, Director of Creative Writing, who have really made the Writers Series possible and have hosted Michael and will host Radvan in due course, and we're very pleased by this collaboration. So, my name is Colin Barr, and I'm the Director of the Keough-Naughton Institute for Irish Studies here at Notre Dame, way on the other side of campus. I got my compass out and found my way to DCO. And it's a real pleasure on behalf of the Institute, as well as our collaborators in English and creative writing, to welcome you to what I know is going to be an absolutely wonderful reading and conversation with our 2025-2026 Irish Writer in Residence, Michael Magee, the inaugural Writer in Residence. Now, this semester we've been delighted to welcome Michael to Notre Dame, including Notre Dame Stadium. He's now a fan, I'm told, of football, which is, as somebody once described, is violence punctuated by committee meetings, much like rugby, where he has taken part not just in football, but enthusiastically contributed to our vibrant community at Keough-Naughton, and of course in English and creative writing. As I say, Michael is our inaugural Writer in Residence, and his fellowship is part of a new and exciting initiative, Irish Literature Initiative there, a collaboration between the Keough-Naughton Institute and the College of Arts and Letters. Now, this initiative, which has been championed by my colleagues Cliona Nero, who I'll introduce to you in a moment, and Barry McRae, who's not with us this evening, recognizes the importance of Irish writers and scholars of Irish literature within the global literary scene. As Barry is always saying, Irish literature is enjoying a moment. I think that's something perhaps that is always true, but is particularly so now. I think we only have to look at bestseller lists, international bestseller lists, international prizes to see that is true. Now, the initiatives bring 2 fellows concurrently to Notre Dame for the academic year, 1 writer and 1 critic, who are both at the cutting edge of creative and scholarly innovation in literature. The fellows will have the opportunity to advance their own work, as well as engage in dynamic conversation with one another and our students, faculty, and staff, both in Irish Studies and Literature and Creative Writing. Now, you may notice we only have 1 of these 2. Obviously, you are enough in yourself, Michael, but we do have our critic joining us in the spring. That's Radvan Markish, Irish language literature scholar and faculty member at Charles University Prague. He will join us as our inaugural critic in residence in January. He simply couldn't make the full year work for personal and professional reasons, so we're going to do it this way, this first time. Now, Radvan and Michael will have a fireside chat together in the spring, so please do keep your eye out for that in due course. Now, I also want to thank Cliona, who will be joining Michael in conversation after his reading, and I'm going to introduce her, and then she will introduce Michael, and Michael will do his reading, and then we'll have a bit of a fireside chat, some questions, and I'll disappear off into the corner where I belong on floor 2. Now, Cliona Nero is Thomas J. Kathleen M. O'Donnell Chair in Irish Language and Literature, Professor in the Department of English, and a Faculty Fellow of the Keough-Naughton Institute, most important. She is a prize-winning translator, literary critic, and editor of 4 anthologies of Irish poetry, as well as 2 collections of essays, Speaking Like a Spanish Cow, which I would like to know more about, and The Poets and Poetry of Munster, both published with Ibidem. Her most recent publication is a personal anthology of the poems of Jerry Murphy, co-edited and co-translated with Paul Benzeman. And her most recent translation is Francis Bacon's Nanny by Mélis Vézéré, published by Lilliput Press in 2024, which I now know has been shortlisted for the Warwick Women's Translation Prize, where we will learn on Thursday, Thanksgiving Day, whether the just and proper result will in fact be announced at the Shard in London. You can all tune in live to hear the good news, as I'm sure we will all do. But I think it's just a tremendous achievement, Cliona, to not another prize, albeit still in shortlist for the time being, and just tremendous, and congratulations to you. Cliona holds a doctorate from the University of Lyon, postgraduate degrees from the Sorbonne Nouvelle, and University College Cork, and undergraduate degree, clearly the most important of these, from Mary Immaculate College in Limerick. With that, Cliona, I'm going to ask you to come to the podium, if that's where you prefer, to introduce Michael and to start us off. Thank you all very much. It was very good start to the
Thank you, Colin. And it has been a real pleasure to have Michael Magee on campus since September. He is a wonderful inaugural fellow for this programme. He has been dropping in on events, hanging out with faculty and students, tailgating like a real domer. And it is a privilege to interview him tonight and to hear him talk about his multi-award winning novel. I feel a bit ashamed, Colin, mentioning my petty awards with all of the number of awards that Michael has won for his novel. Waterstones First Book of the Year, Irish Post book. The accolades went on, and his novel, as you will hear, is an incredible novel. And one of the things that's really exciting, I think, about the process at the moment is Michael, while working on his second novel, is adapting this first novel for television, for Channel 4. And it'll be coming to our screens at the end of this year.
No, 2027.
2027? 27, okay. So we have that to look forward to. Close to Home is a post-ceasefire, post-crash novel. A first-person, first-hand account of a university graduate from a working-class background in Belfast who comes home to Belfast and falls in with his old crowd, despite this fancy degree. As his buddy Ryan says to him, Sean, who's the protagonist of the novel, got further than any of us could, and is no better for it. And this is a quote: "You're exactly where we are, and sure, where the fuck are we?" Close to Home explores where that is. And I don't want you to think that this is, misery fiction. No, this is an entertaining, quicksilver text that has you laughing out loud. Try reading it on an airplane, and you laugh throughout the sleep of the person sitting next to you as you wing your way across the Atlantic. It's a text that gives voice and gives a sense of what it means to be part of the lost generation of the peace process, to whom Sean belongs. Because despite being told that this generation would reap the dividends of peace, in reality, as Michael himself pointed out to Publishers Weekly, that hasn't happened. And the novel really explores what it is to be part of this lost generation, what the implications of it are. Nicole Flattery said that this is the best debut novel in years, a tender examination of class, masculinity, and place. Please welcome Michael Magee.
Okay, Caroline Bagov, Lena, thank you all for being here. This is really, really wonderful. I'm still sort of pinching myself routinely about being here, being part of this incredible department. I want to thank Colin, the Keough-Naughton Institute, Ariel for organising this, and of course Lena and everybody who's been so nice to me so far. It's been a joy. It's been an absolute joy. So I'm going to read like maybe 2 or 3 sections of the book. We'll see how we go. I'm not going to, rip the arse out of it, as I'd say back home. But I just thought, we have time, we might as well use it. I'll start at the start, and then I'll maybe contextualise for the next little bits. Thank you all for reading. Okay. There was nothing to it. I swung and hit him, and he dropped. A girl came flying forward and pushed me. What did you do that for? The lad was lying there and I was standing over him, and there were people all around me making noise. By the time I got away from the tussle, 2 Land Rovers had pulled up. A jaded-looking peeler with a receding hairline came towards me. Peeler's a police officer, sorry. Is that blood? He said, pointing to a stain in my shirt that could have been anything. He took my name and number and told me he would be in touch. I held my hands up and said that was no problem. He came at me, I said. I didn't know what to do. At the top of the street was the lad was put in a stretcher, and the stretcher was heaved into the back of an ambulance. I think it's best you make your way home, the peeler said. I decided he was a good peeler, a helpful peeler. We'll be in touch, he said, and I thanked him. Thanks very much. Back at the flat, Ryan had his phone in his face and was pacing up and down the living room, looking for a party. But it was 5 o'clock in the morning and the birds were out. He pulled the blinds closed as if that would help and nearly took the window with him, the brightness. I grabbed the purple throw my man had given me as a moving in present and pulled it over my head. I lay with my head on the pillow and stared through the space between the empty bottles. Brian checked the fridge, the cupboard next to the fridge. He lifted a can from the counter and gave it a shake. I give up, I says. Give up? You haven't done fuck all. I'm going to bed. Ah, come on, Sean, don't be leaving me hanging here. I'm not leaving you anywhere, I'm in the next room. Bounce into my bed, sure. Well, what's your film? We need to stop doing this. Doing what? Come on. The window above the bed was open and the breeze wafted through. I stripped down my boxers and climbed under the covers but stayed on the outside so I could creep into my own bed as soon as Ryan passed out. The wall was black with mould and it made the room smell damp. There were clothes all over the place, takeaway cartons, cups and glasses and empty cans. Ryan smoked too much weed, that's what it was. It made him lazy, it made him knock about bollocks. I said to him, you smoked too much of that shit, and took the spliff off him. He didn't care. He was sinking into it nicely, and he had his favourite film on, The Shawshank Redemption. He made me watch it every time we ended up like this. It gave him hope. Watch this, he said. It was that scene he loved, the one where Andy Dufresne arrives at the penitentiary and all the inmates are going mad, screaming at him, calling him and the rest of the newcomers fresh fish. I didn't think much of Andy the first time I laid eyes on him. That was Ryan's favourite line. He thought it was brilliant. I did too. Never judge a book by its cover, that's what that means. Never judge anybody, because you never know. So that's the opening. I'm going to jump ahead a little bit here, and I'm going to read a scene that I've actually never read out before, so we're taking a bit of a gamble. We're introduced to a character between this. Sean's actually just come out of a police station, and he's just done an interview in the police station about this assault that he committed at the start. He's in denial. Saying it wasn't his fault, the guy came at him, he punched him. And he comes up, he meets someone in the scene called Mairead, who's like a childhood friend who also went to university, but she stayed in Belfast. So the two of them had a very similar trajectory in that they were the only people in the world that they grew up in who got to university. But their experiences were also very different. She's planning to go to Berlin. I think that's it. If anything else comes up, we'll be fine. Okay. I stepped out of the peeler station that afternoon, feeling like I hadn't seen daylight in days. I shielded my eyes with my hand and looked both ways before crossing the road to the bus stop. The bus pulled over and I stepped back to let the woman with the pram on first. Then I treated myself to the front seat on the top deck. The view was great up there. I liked being able to look down at people going about their day without them knowing I was watching. For some reason, I thought about school. I thought about how I had tricked everyone into thinking I was a hard man, that I could handle myself without ever having to throw a punch. I could widen bottles like a champion, and I was always getting into trouble with the teachers, and that somehow translated into me being able to have a dig. That's how it worked at my school. Tell the teacher to shove his Bunsen burner up his hole, and everybody thinks you can scrap like fuck. If kids started at me on the street, I'd run into my house and hide. I would stare out the bedroom window and pray for them to go away. Sometimes they did. Other times my mum would hand me a hurl and tell me to get stuck into them. I didn't have it in me. My brothers saw this and did what they could to toughen me. They would trail me out onto the street and tell me I had to hit the kid. Tell me to hit the kid I had to fight, and I would, because they were there and nobody had the balls to hit me back. My brothers had fought their whole lives and were good at fighting, yet there I was, the only one out of the three of us who was stupid enough to get caught. I got off the bus on Wellington Place and wandered around that side of town for a while, looking at stuff, thinking about things, but not paying much attention to where I was going until I found myself standing across the street from the clothes shop where Marie had worked. I could see her at the front of the store, hanging clothes on the sale rail. She looked calm, peaceful even. The way she slipped these hanger under the hem, her hands working automatically, without conscious effort. I wondered if I should pretend I was going upstairs to the men's section and bump into her accidentally on purpose. Instead, I messaged her. "I'm in town if you're about," I said, and headed round to the bookshop. He steals a book and he goes to the City Hall to read it. People were on their lunch break. They sat out the front of the City Hall and watched the pigeons and the seals squabble over their crusts. I found a seat in the sun on a bench facing away from the road and read the first page of my new book. I hadn't been able to get through more than a few pages of anything in months, but there was something about the sunshine and the heat and the crowds of people lying in the grass that appealed to that part of me that used to wander around Liverpool with a pocket-skin moleskin journal tucked in the inside pocket of my coat. I had a lot of thoughts back then, and I took them very seriously. Then I finished my degree and moved back home. I hadn't written anything since. I was actually standing outside my work. I looked up, but it was very bright. And even though I couldn't see, I knew it was Maria's. She had a big leather bag slung over her shoulder. Her wrist was bent all the way back. "You're going to get sunstroke," she said. "Look at you." There was a tree behind us with plenty of shades. We sat under there for a while, me with my back against the trunk, gulping from a bottle of water Maria had given me. She was wearing jeans with a black vest top. Her shoulders were sunburnt, and she smelled like aloe vera. "How'd you know where I worked?" she said. "I didn't. I was just walking past. I was going to call in and say hello." She just stood there like a creep, watching me. "I'm no creep. You're right at the front of the shop. Just don't do it again, okay?" I held my right hand up to God. "I'll never walk past your shop again," I said. Maria glared at me. "You're not even funny." I wasn't going to tell her about the interview with the Peelers. I didn't know how she would take it, but I was nervous, and I didn't know who else to talk to. She listened, and when I got to the part about hitting the lad outside that house party, she looked me dead in the eye and said, "You're an idiot." I asked why, and she said, "I thought you would have wised up by now. I thought you would have knocked that shit in the head." I told her there was nothing I could do about it. Two lads came at me. They were going to knock my bollocks in, but she was sceptical. Not about whether or not I was telling the truth, but whether I was right to raise my hand the way I did. "Like, sitting here now, do you think hitting him was worth it?" she said. I thought for a second, then I said, "Aye, I do." "Why?" "Because fuck him, Race. He came at me." "Did he though?" "Of course he did. Why else would I hit him?" Maria didn't answer. She watched a group of girls doing cartwheels on the grass. They wore leggings with crop tops that rode up their bellies as they spun. At the front gates, a fella in an Adidas top and cargo shorts had set up a mic and a speaker and was shouting about sin and salvation. Two wee lads who were sitting on the bench closest to them stood up and walked away. They were holding hands. "Fucking state of it," Maria had said, seeing what I had seen. "I can't wait to get out of this place, I swear to God." "Where do you go, right enough?" "September, October, as soon as I have enough money, I'm gone." "You nervous?" Maria laughed. Not at the question, but the way I had asked it. "I'll be alright," she said. "A few mates over there." She picked a blade of grass and wrapped it around her finger. "I don't want to rely on them too much, though. I want to make my own way, you know." "And then what?" "Then I'll just breathe." Across the way, the girls doing cartwheels were making eyes at a group of lads sitting close by. I glanced at Maria and saw that she was watching them too. She had this look like she remembered something, and for a second it was like she had gone somewhere else. "Can you not breathe here?" I said, and Maria shook her head. "No," she said, "I can't." She stretched her arms out in front of her and lay with her head back in the grass. She had worked 40 hours that week, and she was selling shots again that night, from 10 until 2 o'clock. Then she was in the clothes shop first thing in the morning for a 10-hour shift. The manager was making her cover for a girl who had phoned in sick. "I'm down for a day off," she said. I looked down at her and could see the freckles on her nose and cheeks. Above her lip on the right side, she had a mark from a piercing she did with a needle and an ice cube when she was young. I asked if it was still open, and she leaned on her elbow and said, "Give me a bottle of water." She took a gulp, but kept the water in her mouth, and using the air to push the water into the space between her front teeth and upper lip, spurted a little stream through the hole and across the grass, dribbling on my jeans. "Party trick," she said, and lay back down. I'll leave it there, will I? Yeah. Cheers, thank you so much. I need one of these, okay. Okay.
Thank you. That was great reading.
Thank you.
I noticed that you interrupted that opening speech, that opening section, which is a really wonderful book, to give an aside and to say peelers and police officers.
Yeah.
And we don't have that in the book.
No.
So why did you feel there we needed it and that in the book we didn't?
Yeah, no, that's actually a very good point. I guess in the book you don't want to explain anything too much, you know. You sort of have to have some faith in the reader. That if the reader doesn't know what it is, they'll go to it, you know, they'll find it in some way. And I guess very conscious of the fact that this book takes place in a very particular place, you know, and it's very rooted in that place. And the narrator has a particular language that he uses, the language that he's in some way inherited. And I guess that the peeler in and of itself is a very particularly symbolic and complicated phrase, I guess. It's we call them peelers because of Robert Peel, who was the kind of modern, I guess he created the modern police force, really, didn't he? Mm-hmm. And that's sort of where it comes from. It's kind of a derogatory term.
Yeah, because the alternative is bobbies, but bobbies is more friendly and kind of...
Sure.
You know...
Do you know, I used to have a friend called Spud, after a potato. So we called Spud Potato. And people used to go, "Run like fuck, Spud, the peelers are after you." And the way he was called Spud is because of the size of his head. It's terrible. Yeah.
But you have other guys in the novel who were also called by names like that.
Yeah.
I mean, like you have Flinty.
Flinty?
Yeah. And you know, we feel that they're real.
Sure.
But we also feel that they're a bit cartoonish.
Okay.
No, don't you think?
No,
that,
yeah,
that,
I mean, yeah.
That they're these portrayals of guys that our protagonist hangs out with, but they're not quite as real as him.
Sure. Oh, okay.
No, I mean it's a question. Did you make it? Did you want to make them like that as kind of as types?
Yeah, it certainly did. Whenever it came to, I was writing. I guess I was kind of leaning into that a little bit. I think I was working off people's expectations of who these characters were, particularly in the early stages of the book. You sort of get these sort of rowdy lads, you know, who are all like drinking and taking drugs and rollicking about the place and getting in trouble. But I kind of then wanted to push that. And there's some sequences where they're like, you know, sitting up very late at night and taking and consuming and dancing.
A few toots,
you know. But then then they get to another place within that, which is the place where they allow themselves to open up and say things that they otherwise wouldn't say. So it's in a sense the only space in which they feel they can be vulnerable with each other and also completely open. So they seem like a type on the surface, but then you sort of push, and then you sort of get then a sense of who they are and what their backgrounds are. So the thing they'll often talk about is their parents, you know, and the things their parents have been through and how it has directly affected them, which is, you know, as parents who live through this conflict. Parents who are deeply marked by it. Flinty's father, for instance, was a prisoner.
For 7 years.
For 7 years. And suffered terribly, you know, and was beaten and tortured. And of course, when he returned home after that sort of manifests itself in all sorts of ways, physically and violently. The violence then turns inward, you know. So then, like, that's the sort of, so it was almost like sort of setting people up to subvert their expectations in a way for who these young people were, you know.
But a lot of what you're doing there is dialogue based. Mm-hmm. I mean, in terms of craft, because I think this is one of the things that you need to know about this book, is the craft in it is superb. And the dialogue is doing the showing. We have lots of these dialogue-based sequences, and you enable characters to tell us these things, to give us this background information. Was that a conscious decision?
Yeah, I don't know how much of it is ever a conscious decision, to be fair. But yeah, you sort of, I mean, I knew I wanted to get these people talking to each other, but it is creating the conditions that allows them to say the things they want to say. And so there are lots of, in our sequences, where there are, in those sort of sequences with Ryan and Finty, are sort of, you know, created, you allow that space, you open that space by through drugs and drink, I guess. But then there are other conversations with his mother that happen, but they happen whenever he's forced into her space. So he's evicted from the flat that he lives in with Ryan, and he has to move back into his mother, and the two of them are sort of pressed into this space together, and there's nowhere to move, there's nowhere to go. And so all they do is talk, you know, and often, because I've sort of structured the novel around, like, you know, I've situated it at a very particular historical moment, with a very particular generation of young people who so it's sort of built into the structure of it in a way that allows it then to happen. You know, it kind of has that feel like it's part of the overall sort of fabric of the novel in itself, you know.
Yeah, because you have that, I mean, it's divided in 3 parts. You have that first part, which is the young guys riffing off each other, the encounter with Mairead, the living in the flat. And then you have another space, which is the space which we find in part 2, which is where Sean is in the cemetery.
Oh yeah, of course.
Can you tell us about that and why he had to go to the cemetery and what the cemetery represents?
Okay. Yeah, so he ends up, he goes to court, and of course it doesn't go too well for him, because he's clearly guilty, but he doesn't think he is, which is part of the story. He's sort of in denial about it. You know, the guy who he had deserved it because he provoked him is his sort of logical thinking. And it's a lot to do with him, like, sort of growing up within a space where the main mode of resolving conflict is through violence. And so that's sort of been internalized, you know. There's also like all sorts of like patriarchal sort of impulses happening there. There's a lot of violence in the house at home and also in the street, which you get like a bit of a glimmer of whenever I was reading that second section. But so he goes to court quite naively, thinking he'll be able to talk his way out of it. And they give him 200 hours of community service and a £600 fine, which he can never pay. So he goes, where people in Belfast do community service is in Milltown Cemetery, which is in West Belfast, which is the kind of cemetery where a lot of people connected with the Republican movement, with the armed struggle, and also like victims of violence are all buried there. And when you walk through the cemetery, and we'll talk about this in the book, but you'll see like little flags, little tricolours on the graves of people, and often there'll be Ogla will be sit before their name, which means young warrior, which would mean it would be the grip of a volunteer. It's also the space where Bobby Sands is buried, and a lot of people who died on hunger strike, and also like Republican martyrs and stuff. So he sort of finds himself in this sort of, well, coincidentally, in this incredibly culturally and historically rich space, symbolically rich space, with people within the community who have made mistakes and done things, and often people who shouldn't even be there. There's a young kid called Cricky who got stopped and searched, and he's like 19 and they found a bit for a joint in his pocket, you know, and they give him 100 hours of community service. So like, there's some older men, younger men, and they're also putting this space together, and I guess Sean's sort of, oh, well, I know, sorry. But that space then sort of offers up all sorts of like things for potential dramas and conversations. He cuts grass, he tidies up graves. So there is this kind of, and that space in and of itself is sort of a space, because there's two things happening here, I guess, in that like he's been forced to do labour that he doesn't want to do in the cold and the rain for like 8 hours a day, but at the same time he's like providing sort of a service to his community. He's keeping this space clean and tidy, and it's a space where people go to commemorate and think and reflect and all that kind of thing. So that's what it is, I guess. Yeah.
So that's part 2, and then part 3 is.
What is it?
Part 3 is when he goes back to live with his mother,
yes.
and it's he continues the community service. So you have these three distinct
Sure.
spatial elements which push the plot.
Yeah.
And at the beginning we have lots of showing. We have more telling towards the end. How did you balance that?
God knows, man. I mean, it is just sort of like there was a lot to do with like confrontations happening in this story, that like there's like, because there's this, within the family there's this terrible trauma. Something really bad has happened. And so much of like the reason why Sean is where he is because that's sort of, he's been suppressing that for most of his life and hasn't felt like he was able to sort of talk about it. So like when it came to writing those sequences later on, because they are mostly with his mother in particular, I was going to read a section about her, and I'm kind of raising it, didn't I? Because she's kind of important in where we come with Sean and where we find him later in the book. But I guess like when you're thrown into that space, when you have to return home, you're sort of forced to face all the things, all the reasons why you left it in the first place. So talking and saying things, but you have to create the conditions that allow people to speak first though, you know. It couldn't just be willy-nilly. There's a sequence where like Sean comes home from work and his mother's sitting with her best friend and she's smoking a big spliff, you know, and she thinks she's class. And Sean finds out actually that his mother had guns for the IRA. And now his mother's a Republican and always has been, that's something that's very much part of his. So, but he never knew that about her. And it's something that only comes out because her friend says it. You know, after they've had a few where they're a bit fast and loose. And then later, then he asks her while they're sitting watching TV and eating dinner. He's like, "What do you hate guns?" And then that allows it to happen. And then the narrative's able to go into places that you know otherwise wouldn't be able to go to. The trick is also like, because I think then you sort of slip between dialogue and exposition, you know, and it's keeping that sort of in tune with the dialogue. As I think when there's one section with his mother talking about hiding the guns and what happens while she hides them, and I kind of keep it in her voice, but it's refracted through Sean's perspective. Do you know what I mean? So it's just keeping it consistent with her voice rather than Sean's, but also at times then it sort of get a little bit tricky with that, and you can play with it.
And you do get tricky with voice. I mean, one of the things that we notice when we read the novel is the fact that there are no inverted commas or there's no dashes for dialogue. So, you know, why did you do that? We had a big discussion about it this morning, and we have all kinds of theories.
Oh, really?
As to why
Okay.
you did it.
They're probably better than mine.
So why?
I had, it was a voice thing. It actually was a voice thing because what was happening was that I felt like there was a disparity between the voices of the characters and the sort of, I guess, sequences of description or exposition, that like I felt some kind of disjoint. And what I wanted to do was trick myself, and it's all about playing tricks on yourself as much as anything. But it was tricking myself and sort of being able to use the dialogue to inform how sort of descriptive scenes work, you know, or like how other language within the text works. So it was for me as much as anything. And then I just left it like that. And then, because then I could see some kind of sort of cohesion between like how you move and transition between different modes, you know.
One of the suggestions this morning was that it creates a kind of a haze.
Yeah.
And that there might be an influence of train spotting.
Yeah, no, sadly not.
The haze, yeah, train spotting.
No, I get it. Yeah, I do get that. I think there is a bit of a haze, to be fair. It's interesting because it also it sort of feeds into the trick. Because okay, so when I started writing Close to Home, I wanted to I sort of there was part of me that wanted to emulate train spotting in terms of how he uses language, to the point of like writing phonetically, you know.
Fag, for instance.
Well, fag's ours actually. They say fag.
Yeah, but you wrote it. I mean,
yeah. But it was like, how far do you want to go? Because if I was to write in my accent, you know, then you could actually like go quite far with it in terms of like, yeah. But I think Irvine Walsh has done that better than anybody can, and it's just like let's just leave that. And also, like, I like writing sentences and the way I write them, you know. So it's sort of, but I was sort of torn between those two impulses, like, you know, towards going really full scale Belfast. But I don't think anybody really understood it, you know.
I could make a smart comment about Ulster Scots there, but I won't go there. I think one of the things that we notice also is that hesitation that you even had at the podium when you were doing your reading.
Mm-hmm.
You started by saying I, and then you said Sean.
All right. Did it?
Yeah. I took it down.
Oh, this is becoming therapy now. I don't know.
So
I don't like all that voodoo stuff.
So you know, I've read interviews and I listened to interviews that you did, and you say that you changed the name because the name was Michael first of all, and then it became Sean, and that you needed a persona. Can you tell us about that? How did that work?
Yeah. Oh God, this is very long. I'm sorry about this. It's going to get very convoluted. But so the novel emerged from a letter. Actually, it was a writing exercise sent to me by a friend, who I think actually Jeffrey Eugenides started this, which was you choose a point in your life, and you write a letter to someone you know and love, and no one else is going to read it but this person. Start at a point in your life and just write. So I did that, and there was nothing to it. I swung and hit him, and he dropped. Was what came out, and So a lot of it was to do with like tricking myself into thinking that I wasn't writing a novel, because up to that point, writing a novel was something that I did for the reasons weren't right. I was writing novels to publish, and so I was sort of trying to write a novel that I thought would get published, which isn't the right way to go about it. So I was writing a novel, you know.
And we have the inverted commas.
And all that, you know, and I think he sort of noticed this. He saw something was amiss. And then he gave me this writing. So then very, very quickly I started writing this letter to him, and it just sort of got longer and longer, and I think about 3 months in I had a full manuscript. And so it was deeply personal, deeply confessional piece of writing about all sorts of things. Characters' names remained the same. My name was Michael, or his name was Michael, I don't know. The problem was that it was, I was too much in the way of the material that I was writing about. And so I sort of had to gain some sort of distance from it. I had to sort of step back out of it. And I knew at that point that it was going to be something. It was a novel or a memoir, and I was sort of moving back and forth between those two forms. I was kind of caught between them. It's like, am I doing Carl of the Canalsguard, which was like, I aspired to this, but it wasn't really my thing.
Or doing Edouard Louis.
Or Edouard Louis or Annie Ernaux.
Yeah.
Like I wrote my PhD in Annie Ernaux, so that kind of French autofictional kind of form was really in my head. But I just couldn't do it because I felt too close to the material. I just couldn't step out to be able to make it into something. So and it really did sort of, and that went on for a long time, sort of moving back and forth between two forms, and of course it had all sorts of repercussions for the narrative itself. But at one point then I decided I'll change the character's name from Michael to Sean. And the reason I chose Sean was that my mother wanted to call me Sean. That was my name she wanted to give me when I was born. But the reason she didn't, and the reason she wouldn't, is because she grew up in a society where to carry an Irish name was to be exposed, all right, and to be discriminated against in housing, education, and all that sort of thing, and you know, to be disenfranchised, to be able to, you know, not be able to walk down the street without getting drilled out of your car and searched, you know, being hassled. You know, you're living under occupation essentially for 30 years. That's kind of the feeling that she carried with her. And it was my father that actually refused the letter, call me Sean. That was his kind. He sort of said, you can't do this to him. That's like neutralise his name to sort of, you know, has a bit of a chance. I mean, that was in 1990, so it sort of goes to show that like even then there was no future in which my parents could sense that anything would change in that way. So I thought then I could reclaim that name, and that then Sean would almost become like another version of me, like a fictional persona that I could use. It was with me and not me at the same time, a name that had sort of died in the process of like when I was being named. So it was like reclaiming another...
Like a doppelganger.
Oh, and like sort of, you know, and so then that like allowed me then to sort of look at him as someone that existed outside me and remove me from the equation. And then that allowed me to do what I needed to do.
So to create this other voice.
Mm-hmm.
But I think voice is so important in the novel, and it's... Sean's voice changes depending on who he's speaking to.
Yes. And
then you have this wonderful section where you go to an event. Sean goes to an event. Sean goes to an event about mental health, and you talk about the woman who's speaking, and you're saying, and the thing was, they weren't from the places they were talking about. You could just tell by looking at them, the way they dressed, the way they carried themselves, their voices. They sounded like those uppity fuckers on the news. And we get this whole range of voices. Was that something that you did consciously, this notion of class associated with voice?
Sure. Well, because it's interesting, I guess I should sort of caveat this with saying, so I wrote this book as part of a PhD, career writing PhD, and alongside it I was studying Annie Ernaux's work, particularly her stuff about class migration, social mobility. And also, like what is lost in the process of moving from one class position to another and assimilating into that world, to the point where you alter the way you speak, the way you carry yourself, your body, your cultural reference points, all that kind of sociological stuff. So I was kind of neck deep in that while writing this book. And so I thought then Sean would be sort of occupying that space between both worlds. This world that that's opened up to him through Maria, who sort of vaguely introduces him to, and also the world that he's in some way trying to escape from. And so that sort of internal conflict was really important to sort of get him sort of uncomfortable to be teetering on the brink of these two impulses. So he definitely knows how to code switch because he's been to university as well, and he's been in rooms with people who aren't from the same background, and he knows that then he has to sort of start speaking the way I'm speaking right now, actually, which is a little more telephone voice, and just in order to sort of get through it.
Seamus Heaney talks about that. He talks about, he has a poem where he talks about with his mother, we'd I and no and lapse into bad grammar.
Oh yeah.
And he says, has the mother character say, them, you know about them things.
Sure.
And then he also talks about, because I thought it was interesting, in this part you talk about the uppity fuckers on the news. He also talks about that. So
and does it himself. But also, he sees Maria, who we were sort of introduced to there. It's like her world. She brings him into her world, this sort of world of artists and poets and writers from about Belfast, and he sees how she performs in that world, sees how she adjusts her behaviour and becomes something else. And it's kind of why their relationship is interesting to me, and that like when they're with each other, they behave in a very particular way because they've known each other their whole lives. They can be a version of themselves that they feel like they don't need to act or shift or switch. Whereas when they enter the boards, the two of them are thrown into all sorts of contortions, I guess.
So you mentioned the creative writing PhD, and you talked about the friend that you wrote the writing exercise for. There are lots of writers in the room, there are lots of student writers.
Sure.
How did you get from the place where you were the student writer doing the PhD and sending out the stories to magazines to the place you are today, the inaugural writing fellow at the University of Notre Dame?
I genuinely couldn't tell you, Cliona.
Writing the script for your forthcoming production on Channel 4.
It sort of just happens, I've been.
But it didn't.
Yeah.
Come on.
I've been writing for a long time. There was a bit of a gap between I did an undergrad and then an MA in creative writing. I did my MA in creative writing in 2011, 2012. So it wasn't like I walked out of my MA and suddenly got a book deal. That certainly wasn't.
Yeah, but I think these are important conversations to have, because you need to help people to get from that MA in creative writing to the place where they're.
And I think that's I left when I left the MA. Then I started sending stories out, and that was a humbling experience. And it was like a graft. I was writing and trying to write stories, trying to write novels. I have about 3, 4 novels in the drawer there from my 20s. I was working intensely. I sort of structured my life around it as well. I was working any part-time job I could find, so I didn't have to work full-time, so I could just fucking write. And then it was interesting though, because while you're doing that, you're seeing everybody else around you sort of leave, go to London and Australia and stuff like that. And then I got the opportunity to go to Queen's and do a PhD in 2016, and then I wrote the novel while I was there, and then that was it, But I think it wasn't, you know, I did my MA in 2012. This novel got published in 2023, so it was 10 years
Yeah.
between those two things.
But I think what we get from the novel, what Sean finds at the end of the novel, is a community.
Sure.
And if Sean is you, or if a version of you,
Yeah.
did you find that community?
Yeah, it is.
And how important was that?
Massive. Yeah, in Belfast, we're sort of blessed with poets. Or, well, you know, actually,
Or
are we?
cursed.
Cursed, yeah. Like, he couldn't spit without landing on a poet. Like, it's, and that's wonderful for me because there's no fiction writers. There's a few, but you know, you sort of feel it. But the thing about poets, and this is why I love them so much, is the communal aspect of poetry. That there is this sort of exchange that happens. It's very intense. And there was a poetry workshop happening. Kieran Carson ran it at Queen's at the time. Incredible Belfast poet, probably the Belfast poet. And they were doing that, and I was sort of on the margins of that sort of thing, and just watching it and being part of it in a kind of marginal way. And for me, it just felt like I'd found my people. I felt like I'd found where I needed to be. And then, like, within meeting those people, then I was part of, like, setting up a magazine in Belfast, published loads of brilliant writers.
This is
like,
the Tangerine.
The Tangerine, yeah,
Yeah.
which was a real sort of, like, just an incredible joy to be part of. Like, you know, we published 15 issues over the course of, like, 3-4 years. You know, we were to festival circuits around Ireland and Britain, and people got agents, you know, and people, Louise Kennedy, we published Louise Kennedy's first short story, one of her first short stories now, and she got an agent off the back of it, got about it. So it was like, you know, I was sort of in a community of people who were doing stuff, and who were also reading and talking about writing and all
And were
that,
they,
you know.
I mean, one of the things that strikes me is how poetic it is, how your writing is, and how, you know, repetition is so important in it. I mean, to come back to that opening sequence that you read, it finishes with it, I decided he was a good peeler, a helpful peeler. We'd be in touch, he said, and I thanked him. Thanks very much, I said. Look at the repetition and the internal rhyme and the structure that creates.
Sure.
Were you reading to the poets? Or were
No,
they reading?
Jesus, no. I mean, yeah, they've been subjected to my reading, you know, through this. But I was listening to them a lot. I sort of like cultivated my reading style from listening to them, because they're all fantastic readers, and I try and emulate how they do it, slowing down, getting the right beat, and thinking. And also, like, even when it comes to writing sentences, you know, you have to think in terms of the sound of the sentence, of the sentence, and the sense of the sentence. You have to find different rhythms and different ways of breaking it, and all that kind of thing, and repetition is very much part of that. Also, it helps to have, like, I guess, like, being from where I'm from, you know, I have a very particular accent that I kind of lean into in certain ways. That I when I was writing this book, I had like a post-it on my laptop, on my computer, saying, "Don't write anything Sean wouldn't say." Which then sort of, and I think like setting those sort of limitations for yourself are really important, because then you can really sort of pull at them and interrogate them in different ways. And using an accent as a limitation and a vocabulary as a limitation can sort of open up all sorts of possibilities for what you can do with a sentence.
Yeah, it's very Oulipo.
Aye, okay.
Okay, I think that at this stage perhaps it might be nice to throw out over the questions to, because I could keep talking to you all night, but it would be nice to include the audience. And I know that there are lots of people who have read the book and who probably have questions, if not full-blown theories about your writing.
Okay. Full-blown theories.
Can somebody pass around the microphone?
Oh, here you go. Oh, okay.
Thanks, Jake.
Hi.
Hey,
I'm Crockett. I'm a student, right? Thank you for coming out to speak to us
Thank you.
tonight. I have two questions for you. You mentioned that you felt like you were floating between two genres, fiction and non-fiction.
Sure.
How was that like? And then the second question is, you started this work or this novel as a later. At what point did you realize it was the work of fiction?
Yeah. Okay. I think I was trying to do. I think when I was wavering back and forth between the two forms, the problem was whenever I thought I was writing memoir or non-fiction, I couldn't dramatize. Do you know? Like, I couldn't write scenes without it feeling dishonest. Because then I was putting words in the mouths of people. And words into the mouths of the character that maybe he didn't say. That's not to say the fiction changes that in any sort of way, but like, I think I felt encumbered by it, by trying to stay sort of true and honest. And I thought, I don't know if this is the right thing. And I think so much of the joy I find in writing fiction is writing scenes and sequences, where characters could say and do things and emotional currents run through them in different ways. And the scene then can be structured around those sort of emotional currents, and people can connect or disconnect through them, you know. And I just felt having real people within that space, I just couldn't find it, I couldn't do it. So then, literally, it was when I changed the name of the narrator from well, he was actually called Mick, which is what people call me, to Sean, and that just, it was like turning on a light switch, because then it allowed me space to play. You know, it allowed me, it gave me space that I could dramatize, that I could write sequences, that I could go places intellectually that I couldn't before. Yeah. Interestingly though, it was Vivian Gornick who was a real eye-opener in that respect, because she wrote that, I read that essay she did called The Situation and the Story, the book, which is about writing narrative non-fiction, and in that she talks about creating a sort of narrative persona. And that's in writing non-fiction, that even within that you sort of have to construct a persona, because the material, if you're too close to it and you're in the way of it, it doesn't allow you any objective distance to be able to talk about it in a kind of engaging way. And that was, I think it's like the first chapter in that she talks about how she goes about that, and it's superb. It's really worth having a look at. But yeah, I hope. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Kind of following up on that, you're mentioning scene, you're mentioning dramatization, and what really struck me about your novel is how dramatic writing-y it is, and how there doesn't seem to be like a narrator kind of type person. It feels like we're very much in the inner dialogue of the protagonist, and it's almost like a monologue. Even how you read it now, it's like so theatrical. Now you're going to turn it into a TV show. So what can you say about like the importance of dramatic writing? Like, do you like to read theater?
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know, I'm just curious about that.
Oh, no, that's interesting. I think there is like, I don't read a lot of drama, to be fair. I read a lot of poetry and fiction, I guess. I always loved Frank O'Connor, the short story writer, the Irish short story writer.
Cork short story.
The Cork, sorry, he's from Cork, yeah, of course. How could I have forgotten? Yeah. So he says this, and I think a lot of Irish writers work within this sort of space, which is like the intimacy of the storyteller. Mm-hmm. It's almost, you know, and it's an oral sort of tradition, but the thing that Frank O'Connor says is like, you want your stories to sound like you're listening to someone tell you a story in a bar, mm-hmm. and you're leaning in to listen to what they're saying. And there may be music in the background and things distracting you, but you're hanging on to every single word this person's saying. And I think that sort of underpins how I think about writing. That's a form thing. Voice is form. People just don't say that. Theoretically, people bristle about it. I mean, but even if you read Joyce, if you read Beckett, they're completely voice-driven narratives. And so, yeah, like I sort of, that's been part of my makeup and what I read and how I think about writing, you know. But interestingly, like I do read a lot of American fiction as well. I think American fiction has been really important to me. There's this mad generality that like Americans write scenes, whereas European writers sort of are more introspective and sort of stream of conscious or internal sort of fictions. I don't know how much that's true, but like I sort of lean towards the more sort of writing scenes and sequences. And I think the thing is with Sean's voice, or Sean's perspective, is that I really wanted to close that distance as much as possible. That I didn't want the retrospective distance. I didn't want at any point for him to step out of the story and start like, you know, ruminating. So I was like, I don't care about that. Like this isn't. I want someone to experience the world very directly as he experiences it, and to bristle the way he bristles, and to feel the way he feels at these particular moments. So almost like he's like a conduit, you know. Which is why the characters are also big around him, because in a way, like their stories occupy as much space as his does, which is also important. Yeah.
There's a lot of phenomenally written, fucking horrible nights out in the book, and something there often is that is this awareness of like a shift in the morning.
Sure.
Something I found quite interesting reading it is like being a trainee barista at Cafe Nero, which I assume it is from the colours of t-shirts on offer. Doesn't necessarily feel like it would be the most empowering thing, but it kind of feels that way in the novel, and I feel like work and money were really important for me in reading this, and knowing whether Sean was going to make his shift and how much he was going to make while he was there became really important to my emotional experience of reading the book. I was just wondering if you had anything a bit more to say about kind of work either in the novel or in your kind of view of the writing and character.
For sure. Thank you so much for that question, because it's so important. That, you know, Sean's life is structured by money and not having it. And living precariously. I think that was kind of, and also before I, you know, that sort of in between time between writing my MA and starting a PhD was the time when I was doing those jobs and trying to write around them, and I sort of used that, you know, as a way of structuring Sean's life. I was going to say something there and I ended up with this train of thought. But yes, money, all that sort of thing. Yeah, because the other thing was that the financial crash in 2008 was always a really important context. Because the thing about like where Sean's at that point, when he graduates in 2012 or 2011 and it starts in 2012, is that it's the after effects of that, where the job market's just been crippled, you know? And so opportunities for young people in particular just fell away. And for him, he because he comes from the background there wasn't a lot of like, it wasn't like a financial net he could fall back on. He didn't have his parents, like his mother was a single parent, but no money, can't even afford gas. So his return home is because of his economic circumstances, and that drives him back home. It's also the same with Finty and Ryan and his sort of milieu, is that like these young men were like sort of tradesmen who left school at 16, 17, went to learn like building trades. That would be their sort of, that was going to be their livelihood for the rest of their lives, a skill that they carried through them, and also gave them some degree of independence and
dignity.
And dignity, you know, and then, you know, they were a year or two into their apprenticeship and suddenly this crash happened, manufacturing died in Ireland, and suddenly they were lost.
And construction.
So they had to go to Australia, or they had to go to England, or else they were competing in jobs with university students as baristas. So it's like a really kind of, and then also them are allowed to use them in the long run. So work was central to how I thought about this world, and thought about building it. And it sort of also then falls into the sort of post-Troubles, ceasefire generation group of people, young people who were promised the world. You know, they were promised that we would reap the spoils of peace, and that didn't happen. Actually, one of the big indicators, because there's a lot of conversations happening in Ireland, in the north of Ireland, at the minute, about intergenerational trauma and inherited trauma. And something like 50% of the population in the north of Ireland suffers from some form of PTSD, which is a huge amount of people. Most people who live through the conflict sort of is kind of what they're saying, and how that sort of manifests itself in the younger generation. And one of the big statistics that sort of comes out about that is that more young people lost their lives to suicide since the signing of the Good Friday Agreement at the end of the conflict than died during the whole course of the conflict. And that was about 15, 17 years after. So like in half the time, more young people took their own lives. And you can map it out. Because the Troubles, the conflict happened in working class areas. So I don't know why I've got onto this, but it's sort of like, it's all important in terms of like understanding the context of what the characters are working with, you know, and work's central, absolutely central to it, yeah. Precariousness, the feeling that the carpet could be pulled out from you at any moment, the feeling that if you do stay out in the rib for a day or two, you could lose your job and then you're fucked. You know, it's that kind of like, so I'm glad like it felt like the stakes were high. Because by the end then, when he gets the job in Cafe Nero and he moves into this terrible house share, you want to feel like, oh, he's on his feet, you know. But it's a small little step up, but it feels like he's made a huge leap. Because there was another like version of this where, you know, he sends a short story off and gets published in New Yorker or something. I don't know, but you know, like there is like that, and that's not what this is. You know, it's like little gradual sort of steps. But yeah, sorry, that was a very long answer.
Yeah. Well, I'd like to thank you for not writing the other version.
Yeah.
Way better.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you so much. Cheng? Oh.
So I think this is a question probably informed a little bit by the holidays, but like upon returning to a place that is complicated and fraught,
Sure.
there's the obvious sort of like disdain, uncertainty, insecurity about that, but it also like it's home, your friends are there, it's a place that of excitement too, and so there's that tension and that return. I was just wondering, like, how did you approach that? Like, what were the tools you used to try and reconcile those two, like, very intense sort of polarities? As I was hearing you talk, it seemed like humor may be the vehicle in which, like, a lot of these two totally different things sort of reconcile. But I just want to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, cheers, man. It's funny because the way I've sort of constructed this story is it's almost a story of like aftermath, you know. And so the punch is the beginning, but everything that happened before it is the kind of build up to it in a way. And so then the rest of the novel's almost like going back on itself. When it came to writing, because there is actually a Christmas scene in the book where he goes home and has Christmas dinner with his mother and his brothers. It's chaotic as well, isn't it? I can't really remember it, but I don't know. I remember thinking, like, you know, that feeling that you have whenever you return home from university for the first time. Do you know when you've been away and you come back home and you think you're smarter than everybody? Do you know that kind of? And you're like, oh god, I'm a terrible person.
I still have that.
Yeah, no, me too. But like, you don't feel good about it. But I think. I don't really know. I think one of the things that I was trying to do in the novel was like, that Sean's world was sort of both getting smaller and smaller and smaller, while at the same time opening out. And that sort of movement from like, because he lives in this flat, estate, and it's a squat, you know, and they're just having a good time, brother. You know, they're just like, this is. And then when they lose that, and then he has to go back, and he has to go into this very small space with his mother, and he lives in a room that doesn't have any windows in it, and he's sleeping on a mattress on the floor, and they're on top of each other, and other things happen in and around that, where his brother comes. I haven't even spoke about Anthony, which is crazy. This is the longest episode. Anthony's his big brother, who's like this, who's a figure that he looked up to, and who was his sort of. Role model growing up, but not necessarily in the best sort of way. And Anthony's going through all sorts of crisis in himself. But he then occupies that space, and so the three of them are then pushed together in all sorts of ways. And it was just like finding that, just like using the space. You know what I mean? Like I'm very on board with placing characters in space. And, you know, letting them fucking bump up against each other and see what happens. And I think that sort of allowed all sorts of things to come out of it, you know. Particularly around silence, I guess, because there's a lot of like unspoken sort of places that they don't want to go, which then are sort of forced out of them because of their closeness to each other, you know. I don't know if that answers your question at all, mate, but I tried my best. Yeah. There's someone in there.
Tierna.
Tierna. Irish gone, yeah? Irish gone, yeah?
Hi, thank you for that lovely reading and the conversation. I had a question about like the reading itself. Like, what makes you choose to read particular passages at one reading versus another reading? Like, do you hope to have a certain conversation coming out by choosing certain passages?
Well, the thing is, right, I usually have like 3 go-tos, which is the start. I always the start's easy because I kind of know it off by heart by now, so I'm just like, it's an easy read. And then have like 2 other scenes, neither of which, I've never read that scene with Maria before, but for some reason she was kind of in my head. And I found that scene today and thought, you know, it's kind of nice. And I think it speaks to that feeling where Sean's at, you know, of like trying to, she's wanting to get out and is trying to escape, and the 2 of them in that way are sort of occupying the same space, you know. To set up with the punch at the start then and to see where he's at in the immediate aftermath of that, and then having him read where she is, because she's such an important figure in his life. Usually I read out a scene where he's working in the cemetery, but it felt a wee bit too local in a way. It was like, because so I do get. The short answer is yes, I do tailor it. I thought you think about the audience for sure. If I'm back home, I read the Milltown scene, or there's a scene about his mother talking about Hagen guns, which is what I was going to read after that, but we would have been here all day. That I tend to read just because it's sort of it's about why she did what she did, and also her feelings about doing it, and also his, and then the past, and then the stakes and all that kind of thing, which I kind of like doing because it sort of shocks people as well in a way. So, but yeah, I certainly think about it reading through, yeah, for sure. Yeah. Hi, Tanya.
Hi, how you doing?
Fine.
Can I ask 2 questions?
Go on.
Okay, well, quick. So the first one, you kind of got at it with your answer to Aaron's question. So it seems obvious to us in the Irish novel by a young man that we talk a bit more about emigration.
Sure.
I feel like Sean never really considered emigrating. He comes back from Liverpool, but like Ryan's going to have a good time in Australia, and Maria's going, but it's like he never considered it. So I'm just wondering if you could reflect on that, how conscious that choice was. The second thing is, so I was in West Belfast last week, and I was in Glornamona talking to some folks there, and I was just about to tell them.
Are we talking about Finley? No. Fergal?
Fergal, yes. And I was just about to tell them, knowing they know you, oh, Michael's with us this year. And I turned around and there was a young fella at the table beside me reading your book. So I'm vicariously humbled by him. But so my question is, I'd love to know more about how your book has been received in West Belfast.
Oh, yeah, okay.
I'm thinking about all of the themes you raised, like intergenerational trauma, suicide, all those things. I'm sure there's been quite a bit of slagging, but also probably quite a lot of pride.
Everybody thinks they're in it. That's the thing. Thank you so much. I can't even. What was my first question again?
The migration and the.
Oh, migration. Yeah. Well, in a way, he does migrate, Grania, from west to south Belfast.
That's the biggest one.
But that is a huge cultural shock for it. I'm telling you, that's kind of. Well, that's the thing. It's about small sort of movements. The world that he moves from and to in that book is they're polar opposites in all sorts of ways. He moves to the leafy suburbs, university campus sort of area, which Malone Road, Lisburn Road, the Ormo Road, very different sort of space than the space he grew up in. He has a conversation with Ryan, where Ryan's a bit like, why don't you come to Australia with me? And he's like, I want to stay here and write. And they're like, what? Because I think he knows if he were to go to Australia with Ryan, he just wouldn't. You know, he would fall into the same sort of patterns of behaviour that he's been in for the last year. So in a way, he's trying to extract himself from Ryan, which is really hard for him because he loves his mates. They have there's a lot of love between them, but they're also toxic, you know, and I think he needs to find his own way. The ultimate litmus test in West Belfast is, I think it seems to have gone down okay. Yeah, I think I remember doing like my first event in Belfast City Centre in the Waterstones there. And a big squad of Westies came down that I had no idea until they all came up after and said how much it meant to them. And I've done like events up west. Actually, one of the this is a belter. I was up in the Rock Bar in the Falls Road, which you'll know, and they do Scribes of the Rock every year at Fela and Foble, which is the West Belfast Festival. And I read out 3 sections, and the third one was the section where his mother hates guns for the IRA, and Jerry Adams was sitting there, genuinely, and like Danny Morrison and Sienna Walsh, the whole IRA Army Council. Danny Morrison was introducing me. He was like the head of Sinn Féin Public Press, you know. That was mental because it felt, because the people in the room there were people. You're talking ex-prisoners, you're talking people who were very much involved in the armed struggle, and people who were involved politically and activists and all that. Like, so I remember going up to read that bit and being like, I don't know how this is going to go, you know, like a sort of. But Jerry Adams walked the topic. He was very much down for somebody. I was like, must be alright, you know. I don't know, but I think. Yeah, I think it's been grand. I think it's been good. I've been getting like lots of, but lots of messages from people, from where I'm from, and lots of people contacting me who's felt in some way that it's been meaningful for them. So I don't know. I mean, you'd have to take a public vote or something to know how much they actually care about it. But I think it's okay. It'll be interesting because we're going to be filming in West Belfast here. They're actually scouting around my scouting around Poblass in Twinbrook, where I'm from. At the minute, they're sending me pictures of different places in the States, which is surreal because I was like, I used to drink there. That's where I smoked. That's where, that's the shop I went to get some sausages from. And then also they took a picture of my brother's flat without even knowing that's where he lived. It was like, that's where my brother lives. So it's very sort of surreal and close. And so when it comes to filming it, it'll be interesting to see how people interact with it. So yeah.
Okay. On that note, I think
Thank you so much.
we can thank Michael for a wonderful reading and a great